It's time for payback.
The pawn ticket was tucked inside Nina's jewelry box, like a confession waiting to scream. I held my grandmother's wedding ring receipt between my fingers, the yellow paper trembling not from my hands but from the rage building in my chest. 23 years of marriage. 47 years that ring had been in my family, sold for $800 to cover what the ticket called personal debt. My wife was in the shower, humming some tune I didn't recognize. The sound made my skin crawl now. Everything about Nina had become foreign to me over the past 6 months, but I'd been too blind to see the signs. Too trusting to question why she'd started taking weekend trips to Portland, why her phone stayed face down during dinner, why our joint account had been bleeding money like a severed artery. I slipped the ticket back where I found it and closed the jewelry box. The house around me felt different now, like the walls themselves had betrayed me. This wasn't just our home. It was the house my great-grandfather built in 1923, the house where my father learned to walk, where I'd carried Nina across the threshold on our wedding night. Every board, every nail, every carefully restored window represented 4 generations of Ford family history, and she'd mortgaged it without telling me. The water stopped running upstairs. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself coffee with hands that had built furniture, restored antiques, and crafted beauty from broken things. Now those same hands wanted to destroy something for the first time in my life. "Morning, honey," Nina said, appearing in her silk robe with damp hair. She kissed my cheek like she'd done thousands of times before, but now it felt like a lie pressed against my skin. "Morning," I said, not looking up from my cup. She moved around the kitchen with practiced ease, the same routine we'd shared for over 2 decades. But I noticed things now that I'd been blind to before, the way she checked her phone every few minutes, the designer purse that cost more than I made in a week, the nervous energy that had replaced the comfortable silence we used to share. "I'm meeting the girls for lunch today," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Probably won't be back until evening." The girls. That's what she called whatever the hell she was really doing. I nodded and kept drinking my coffee, playing the role of the oblivious husband while calculating how long it would take me to install the security cameras I'd ordered online last week. "Alex?" She touched my shoulder, and I forced myself not to recoil. "Are you okay? You've been quiet lately." I looked up at her then, really looked. Nina was still beautiful at 35, with the kind of effortless elegance that had made me feel lucky every day of our marriage. But something had changed in her eyes. There was a distance there, a coldness that hadn't existed before her first trip to Vegas 8 months ago. "Just tired," I said. "The Morrison House restoration is taking longer than expected." She nodded absently, already thinking about whatever she was really planning to do today. "Well, don't work too hard. You know how you get when you're stressed?" "How I get when I'm stressed. Like it was my fault our marriage was falling apart. Like I was the problem." After she left, I sat in the silence of our kitchen and made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to confront her. I wasn't going to beg or plead or try to save what was already dead. Instead, I was going to do what I did best: build something. Only this time, I wasn't building furniture or restoring houses. I was building a trap. The first camera went into the living room light fixture, the second into the bedroom smoke detector. The third, most importantly, into the wooden beam I'd handcrafted in my workshop, the beam that ran directly above where Nina liked to sit and make her private phone calls. It took me 3 days to wire the system properly, routing everything through my workshop where she never went. Each installation was invisible, professional, permanent. I'd learned electronics as part of my carpentry work, adapting to the modern world's demands. Now those skills served a different purpose. Devin called while I was testing the audio feed. "Alex, we need to talk!" My best friend's voice sounded strained through the phone. Devin Mitchell had been our family attorney for 15 years, handling everything from the house deed to Nina's father's estate. He'd been my best man, godfather to the daughter we'd never had, the brother I'd chosen. "What's up?" I asked, though something in his tone made my stomach clench. "Can you come to my office?" "It's about Nina." The drive to Devin's law firm felt like a funeral procession. Downtown Millbrook looked the same as always: weathered storefronts, mountains looming in the distance, the kind of Pacific Northwest town where everyone knew everyone else's business. Except I'd been living in ignorance while my life crumbled around me. Devin's office occupied the second floor of a restored Victorian, all dark wood and leather-bound books. He stood behind his desk like a man facing execution, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his tie loosened. "Sit down, Alex." I remained standing. "Just tell me." He opened a file folder, then closed it again. "Nina came to see me last week. She wanted to know about accessing her inheritance early, about liquidating assets from her father's trust. Nina's father had died 3 years ago, leaving her a substantial inheritance tied up in various investments and trust funds. The money was supposed to provide security for our retirement, for the family we'd planned to build in this house." "How much?" I asked. "All of it, $230,000? Devin's voice cracked. "Alex, she's already withdrawn most of it. The trust is nearly empty." The room tilted. $200,000 gone. "Where is it?" "I don't know. She wouldn't say, but Alex..." He pulled out another document. "She also asked me about the house, about your ownership rights, about what would happen in a divorce." The word hung between us like a capital punishment. Divorce. She was planning to leave me and take everything. "There's more," Devin continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "She asked me not to tell you about any of this. She said you were becoming unstable, that she was concerned about your mental health." My mental health? While she was stealing our future and planning her escape, she was setting me up to look like the unstable one. The rage in my chest crystallized into something cold and calculating. "Did you tell her anything?" I asked. "No." "God, Alex, I would never..." "Good." I stood up. "Don't tell her we had this conversation." "What are you going to do?" I looked at my oldest friend, the man who'd known me since college, who'd watched me build my life board by board. "I'm going to find out where my money went. And then I'm going to get it back." The camera footage from the first week was mundane. Nina moving through our house like she owned it, talking on the phone in hushed tones, checking herself in mirrors with the kind of vanity I'd once found charming. But on Thursday evening, everything changed. I was in my workshop, supposedly working on a custom dining set while actually monitoring the feeds on my laptop. Nina had been pacing the living room for 20 minutes, phone pressed to her ear, her voice too low for the microphones to pick up clearly. Then she laughed, a sound I hadn't heard in months, and said something that made my blood freeze. "Tyler, you can't keep saying things like that. No, Alex is working late again. Of course I miss you too." Tyler. I rewound the footage, turned up the volume, and listened again. Tyler Graves. I knew that name. He was a property developer from Seattle, one of those slick guys who bought old houses, gutted them, and flipped them for profit. I'd met him at a charity auction 2 years ago, where he'd spent the evening trying to convince local homeowners to sell their outdated properties to him. Nina had spent that entire evening talking to him. The conversation continued, and what I heard next made me understand exactly where our money had gone. "The casino called again. I know, but it was just bad luck. Tyler, I can pay it back once we sell the house." "Yes, the one I told you about, the Victorian..." "No, Alex doesn't know anything." I sat in my workshop surrounded by the tools of my trade, listening to my wife plan my destruction with another man. The gambling debts, the missing money, the mortgage I'd discovered she'd secretly taken out on our house. It all fit together like joints in a piece of furniture, perfectly aligned to destroy everything I'd built. But what came next changed everything from heartbreak to warfare. "I love you too," she whispered into the phone. "Tomorrow night when Alex thinks I'm at book club..." "Yes, here. He's never home anyway. Tyler, bring those papers we talked about. The ones about the development deal." Development deal. She wasn't just cheating on me and stealing our money. She was planning to sell our house to her lover so he could tear it down and build condos. I turned off the laptop and sat in the darkness of my workshop, surrounded by the smell of sawdust and wood stain. This place had been my sanctuary, where I created beautiful things with my hands. Now it was my command center for something entirely different. Nina wanted to play games? Fine. But she'd picked the wrong opponent. I'd spent my life building things to last, thinking 10 moves ahead, planning for every contingency. She was gambling with borrowed money and stolen trust. I was about to show her the difference between a professional and an amateur. Friday evening came with rain, the kind of steady drizzle that made Millbrook feel like it was dissolving into the gray sky. Nina had left for her book club, wearing a dress I'd never seen before, her perfume lingering in the hallway like evidence of a crime. I watched from my workshop as Tyler Graves pulled into our driveway in a silver BMW. The kind of car that screamed new money and bad taste. He was exactly what I'd expected. Tall, artificially tanned, wearing a leather jacket that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. He moved with the swagger of a man who'd never been challenged, never been told no, never had to build anything with his own hands. The cameras captured everything. Tyler kissing my wife at our front door. Nina leading him through the house I'd spent years restoring, pointing out architectural details like she was giving a tour to a potential buyer, which, I realized with sick clarity, she was. They sat on the couch where Nina and I had watched movies for 20 years, and I listened through my headphones as they planned my ruin. The property appraiser said $400,000 minimum, Tyler said, his voice carrying the smooth confidence of a practiced liar. Maybe more once we demo the interior. These old places are gold mines if you know what you're doing. And Alex won't suspect anything until it's too late? Nina asked. She was curled against him like a cat, her hand on his chest, comfortable in a way she hadn't been with me in years. Sweetheart, by the time your husband figures out what's happening, the papers will be signed, and the house will be sold. We'll be in Cabo spending our money while he's trying to find a lawyer who will take his case. Our money. The money Nina had inherited from her father, the money she'd lost gambling, the money Tyler had probably provided to pay her debts in exchange for this. I was watching my wife courtesan herself with my own house as the currency. What about Devin? Nina asked. He's been asking questions. Tyler laughed, the sound of a hunter discussing prey. Your friend, the lawyer? Don't worry about him. Men like that don't fight, they just file paperwork and send bills. By the time he understands what happened, we'll be untouchable. They talked for another hour, working out details, discussing timelines, making plans for a future built on the destruction of everything I cared about. Tyler produced documents from his briefcase, contracts, development proposals, architectural sketches showing a row of modern condos where my family's house currently stood. You're sure Alex won't be a problem? Tyler asked, his hand sliding down Nina's back. Some of these quiet types can surprise you. Nina laughed, and the sound was like glass breaking inside my chest. Alex? God, no, he's completely passive. I could probably tell him I was leaving, and he'd just ask if I needed help packing. He's never fought for anything in his life. I turned off the feed and sat in the darkness of my workshop, letting their words settle into my bones like concrete hardening. Passive, never fought for anything, completely harmless. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Saturday morning brought sunshine and the kind of clarity that comes after a storm. Nina was still asleep, exhausted from her evening of planning my destruction, when I drove to Tyler's current development project on the outskirts of town. The construction site was exactly what I'd expected, a row of half-built luxury condos that would look out of place in our small town, designed for rich people from Seattle who wanted a mountain retreat. The kind of soulless development that was slowly choking the character out of places like Millbrook. I parked across the street and studied the site with professional eyes. Tyler might be good at talking and charming married women, but his construction operation was amateur hour. I could see code violations from 100 yards away, improper foundation work, substandard electrical installations, load-bearing walls that wouldn't bear the load of a strong wind. My phone buzzed with a text from Nina. Running errands today. Don't wait up tonight. Girls' weekend at Sarah's cabin. Sarah's cabin. Another lie. I almost admired her creativity if it wasn't so pathetic. I spent the morning documenting Tyler's construction violations with my camera, taking detailed photos of every shortcut, every corner cut, every decision that prioritized profit over safety. I'd spent 20 years learning building codes, working with inspectors, ensuring that everything I built would stand long after I was gone. Tyler was building death traps and calling them luxury housing. By afternoon, I had enough evidence to shut down his entire operation. But that was just the beginning. I drove to the county courthouse and spent 2 hours in the records office, tracing Tyler's business history through public documents. What I found was a pattern of failed developments, unpaid contractors, and legal settlements that painted a picture of a man who stayed one step ahead of his mistakes by moving to new towns and finding new sufferers. Tyler Graves wasn't just stealing my wife and my house. He was a hunter who'd done this before, who'd probably done it to other families in other towns. The thought of him moving on to destroy someone else's life after he finished with mine made my jaw clench. That evening, while Nina was supposedly at Sarah's cabin, I made my first move. I called the county building inspector. Jim, it's Alex Ford. Yes, the furniture guy. I'm calling about the Pineview Heights development. No, I'm not bidding on work there. I'm reporting safety violations. Jim Patterson had been the county inspector for 12 years. We'd worked together on dozens of projects, and he trusted my judgment about construction standards. What kind of violations, Alex? The kind that could get people eliminated. Electrical work that doesn't meet code, foundation issues, improper load calculations. This place is going to collapse the first time we get a real storm. That's serious. I'll need documentation. I'll email you photos tonight. Jim? This needs to happen fast. They're rushing to get occupancy permits before anyone looks too closely. I'll be there Monday morning. After I hung up, I opened my laptop and began typing the first of many emails I'd be sending over the next few weeks. The subject line read, "Safety violations at Pineview Heights Development. Immediate inspection required." I attached 37 photos and a detailed report written in the professional language of someone who understood construction from the ground up. By Monday afternoon, Tyler's project would be shut down pending a full safety review. His investors would panic, his timeline would be destroyed, and that was just the first domino. Monday brought chaos to Tyler's world, though he didn't know I was the source of it yet. The building inspector's visit turned into a full work stoppage, with bright red notices posted across the development site like warning flags. I watched from my truck as Tyler arrived to find his workers standing idle and his foreman arguing with county officials. The beauty of bureaucratic warfare was its patience. Tyler could charm my wife, could steal my money, could plan to destroy my house, but he couldn't fast-talk his way past building codes and safety regulations. Those existed in a world of facts and measurements, not manipulation and smooth words. Nina called me at lunch, her voice tight with stress. "Alex, have you heard anything about problems at the Pineview development?" "Should I have?" I asked, enjoying the first genuine moment of satisfaction I'd felt in months. Tyler mentioned some kind of inspection issue, probably just bureaucratic nonsense, but it's delaying his project. "These things happen," I said. "Sometimes inspectors actually do their jobs." "Right. Well, I probably won't be home for dinner. I'm helping Sarah with something." More lies. I'd driven past Sarah's house that morning. Her car was in the driveway, but Nina's wasn't. My wife was somewhere else, probably comforting Tyler over his sudden business troubles. That afternoon, I made my second move. I'd researched Tyler's financing and discovered he was leveraging multiple properties to fund his developments. The Pineview project was crucial to his cash flow. Without it, he'd miss payments on other loans. The work stoppage would cascade through his entire financial structure like cracks spreading through poorly laid concrete. I called his primary lender, Pacific Northwest Commercial Bank, and asked to speak with the business loan department. "I'm calling about Tyler Graves and Graves Development," I told the loan officer. "I'm a local contractor, and I wanted to make sure you were aware of the safety violations that just shut down his current project." "Safety violations?" "Complete work stoppage. County inspector red-tagged the entire site." I'm not saying anything against Mr. Graves personally, but as someone in the construction business, I thought you should know there might be significant delays in his development timeline. Banks hated surprises. They especially hated borrowers who encountered unexpected problems that could affect their ability to repay loans. A simple phone call, expressing concern as a fellow professional, would trigger a review of Tyler's account and possibly accelerate payment schedules. By Wednesday, Tyler's problems had multiplied. The work stoppage had become a full investigation. His loan officer was asking uncomfortable questions. His investors were demanding answers he didn't have, and Nina was starting to crack under the pressure. I watched her through the cameras as she paced our living room, phone pressed to her ear, her voice rising in frustration. "What do you mean the bank wants payment early? Tyler, you said this was all arranged." "No, I can't get more money from the trust. Devin is asking too many questions already." She was trapped between Tyler's failing schemes and the reality that her safety net was already gone. The inheritance money she'd lost gambling wasn't coming back. The house she'd planned to sell was still in my name, protected by documents she'd never bothered to read carefully. For the first time since I'd found the pawn ticket, I smiled. Devin called Thursday morning while I was installing crown molding at the Morrison house, trying to maintain the routine that kept me sane while my real life burned down around me. "Alex, we need to talk." It's urgent. I met him at Miller's Diner, the kind of place where conversations couldn't be overheard and the coffee was strong enough to wake the dead. Devin looked like he hadn't slept in days, his usually immaculate appearance rumpled and stressed. "Nina came to see me again," he said without preamble. "She's desperate, Alex. Whatever's going on with her, it's getting worse." "What did she want this time?" Devin hesitated, stirring his coffee like he was buying time. "She wanted me to prepare divorce papers. She's planning to file next week." The words hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd been expecting them. Hearing it confirmed, spoken aloud by my oldest friend, made it real in a way the surveillance footage hadn't. "She also asked about liquidating the house quickly," Devin continued. "She has a buyer ready to make an immediate cash offer. Tyler Graves." Devin's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. "How did you—" "I know about all of it. The gambling, the stolen inheritance money, the affair. I know she's planning to sell our house to pay her debts and run away with her lover." "Alex," Devin set down his cup carefully, "why didn't you tell me? I could have helped. Could have protected your interests legally. Could you?" I leaned forward, studying my oldest friend's face. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been helping her instead of me." The color drained from Devin's face. "That's not— I've been trying to navigate a difficult situation. You've been in love with my wife for 20 years. The words hung between us like a loaded tool. Devin's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. "I'm not blind, Devin. I've seen the way you look at her, the way you always made time for her problems, the way you jumped to help whenever she needed legal advice. You think I didn't notice?" "Alex, it's not what you think, isn't it?" I kept my voice calm, professional, the same tone I used when explaining construction problems to clients. "She comes to you with problems she won't discuss with her husband. You help her access money, research divorce options, all while pretending to be my friend. What would you call that?" Devin slumped in his seat like a building with its supports removed. We never— Alex, I swear I never acted on my feelings. I just wanted to help her destroy me. No, God, no. I hoped that if I helped her through whatever crisis she was having, maybe she'd realize what she had with you. Maybe she'd come to her senses." The pathetic honesty in his voice almost made me feel sorry for him, almost. "Instead, you made it easier for her to betray me. You enabled her gambling, her lies, her affair. You helped her research how to leave me with nothing." "I didn't know about the gambling or the affair," Devin said desperately. "If I had, you would have done exactly what you did. Because you've been hoping for 20 years that my marriage would fail, so you could swoop in and save her." I stood up, dropping a 20 on the table. "Here's some free advice, counselor. When Nina's new life with Tyler falls apart, and it will, don't be there to catch her. You've already destroyed one friendship chasing a woman who will never love you back. Don't make it worse." I left Devin sitting in the diner, staring into his coffee cup like it held answers to questions he was afraid to ask. Another piece of my old life crumbled away, but I felt lighter somehow. The truth, even when it hurt, was easier to carry than illusions. Friday evening, Nina announced she was going to another book club meeting. I almost laughed at the transparent lie, but I just nodded and wished her a good time. She kissed my cheek, the same mechanical gesture she'd been making for months, and drove away in her car toward whatever illusion of happiness she thought she was building. I waited 30 minutes, then drove to Tyler's apartment complex across town. His BMW was in the parking lot, confirming what I already knew. I parked where I could watch his building and settled in to wait. They emerged 2 hours later, Tyler's arm around Nina's waist like he owned her. They got into his car and drove toward downtown, probably heading to dinner at some restaurant where they thought they wouldn't be seen. In a town the size of Millbrook, anonymity was an illusion, but cheaters always believed they were smarter than everyone else. I didn't follow them. Instead, I drove to Tyler's construction site. The security was minimal, a chain-link fence and a single night watchman who spent most of his time in a trailer watching TV. I parked 2 blocks away and walked through the darkness, carrying a duffel bag filled with tools I'd modified for purposes their manufacturers never intended. Getting inside was easy. The fence had gaps, the security cameras were poorly positioned, and the watchman was more interested in his shows than doing his job. I made my way to the partially constructed buildings, moving like a ghost through the shadows of Tyler's ambitions. What I did next would be invisible until it was too late. I'd spent weeks studying the construction plans, identifying the critical stress points where small changes would have catastrophic effects. A few bolts loosened here, some support cables adjusted there, electrical connections altered in ways that would cause failures during the final inspections. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. The sabotage would be discovered long before any residents moved in. But it would destroy Tyler's timeline, bankrupt his investors, and ruin his reputation in the construction industry. Word traveled fast in small communities, and contractors who built dangerous structures found themselves unemployable very quickly. It took me 3 hours to complete my work, invisible modifications that would cascade through Tyler's entire operation like a virus. By the time I finished, sweat was pouring down my face despite the cool night air, but I felt more satisfied than I had in months. I was almost back to my truck when I saw them. Nina and Tyler parked in his BMW at the edge of the construction site, too absorbed in each other to notice me in the shadows. They were arguing about something, their voices carrying across the empty lot. "Can't keep delaying," Nina was saying. "The divorce papers need to be filed next week, or Alex might get suspicious." "Baby, relax," Tyler replied, his hands on her shoulders. "Everything's going according to plan. The building issues are just temporary setbacks." "Temporary?" "Tyler, your entire project is shut down. The bank is asking questions. Devin thinks Alex might be onto us." "Alex doesn't have the balls to fight us," Tyler said with the casual cruelty of a man who'd never been challenged. "He's a carpenter, not a businessman. He builds birdhouses and fixes squeaky doors. He's not going to cause us any real problems." I stood in the darkness, listening to them dismiss me like I was some harmless pet, and felt the last vestiges of mercy drain from my heart. They thought I was weak because I was quiet. They mistook patience for passivity, craftsmanship for simple-mindedness. They were about to learn the difference between a man who builds things to last and people who just take what they want. Monday brought Tyler's second catastrophe. The structural modifications I'd made were discovered during a routine inspection, triggering a complete engineering review of the entire project. The inspector found systematic instabilities that suggested either gross incompetence or deliberate sabotage. I watched from my truck as Tyler screamed at his foreman, his smooth composure finally cracking under the weight of cascading failures. His investors were pulling out, his loans were in default, his reputation was circling the drain like water in a broken sink. But the real masterpiece came that afternoon. I'd spent the weekend creating a detailed dossier on Tyler's business practices, complete with financial records, construction violations, and evidence of fraudulent dealings with previous clients. The documents painted a picture of a man who left a trail of bankruptcy and broken promises wherever he went. I mailed copies to the county prosecutor, the state contractor licensing board, and 3 different newspapers. I also sent a copy to Pacific Northwest Commercial Bank, along with a note suggesting they might want to review their risk assessment procedures. By Wednesday, Tyler's construction license was under review. By Friday, there was a warrant out for his arrest on charges of fraud and reckless endangerment. Nina tried to hide her panic, but I could see it in every gesture, every nervous glance at her phone, every late-night errand that took her away from the house. She was watching her escape plan crumble in real time, and she had no idea I was the architect of her destruction. "You seem stressed," I told her over dinner Friday night, the first meal we'd shared at home in weeks. "It's nothing," she said, pushing food around on her plate. "Just work stuff. Anything I can help with?" She looked up at me then, and for a moment I saw something that might have been guilt flickering in her eyes. "No, it's complicated. Most problems are simpler than they seem," I said. "Sometimes the solution is just being honest about what's really wrong." Nina stared at me for a long moment, and I wondered if she might actually confess. If she might save herself by telling the truth and begging forgiveness. It would have been the smart play, the only play that might have saved her from what I had planned. Instead, she looked away and mumbled something about being tired. That night, I activated the final phase of my plan. The foreclosure notice arrived on a Tuesday morning in November, delivered by a sheriff's deputy who apologized for the inconvenience. Nina signed for it with shaking hands, her face white as printer paper. "Alex!" she called from the kitchen, her voice cracking. "We need to talk." I found her sitting at our kitchen table, the foreclosure papers spread out like tarot cards predicting doom. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of consequences she hadn't seen coming. The bank says we're behind on the mortgage, she said without looking up. How is that possible? I sat across from her, the same seat I'd occupied for thousands of meals over the years. When did you take out the second mortgage, Nina? Her head snapped up, eyes wide with surprise and fear. How did you… When? 6 months ago, she whispered. I needed… There were some expenses. Gambling debts. It wasn't a question, and she didn't try to deny it. The lie collapsed between us like a house built on sand. The casino in Portland, I continued. You lost your inheritance money, then took out a loan against our house to cover what you owed. How much? $200,000. And when Tyler's development deal fell through, you couldn't pay it back. Nina's composure finally shattered. Tears streamed down her face as she nodded, reduced to the kind of broken honesty that only comes when all other options are exhausted. I'm so sorry, she sobbed. I never meant for it to go this far. It was supposed to be easy money, a quick flip, and then everything went wrong. Everything went wrong the moment you decided to lie to me. Alex, please, we can fix this. We can sell the house, downsize, start over. We can't sell the house. She looked up through her tears, confused. Well, what do you mean? I pulled out a folder I'd prepared for this moment and spread its contents on the table next to the foreclosure notice. Property deeds, insurance documents, legal filings, all the paperwork that told the real story of our assets. The house is in my name only, I said calmly. It always has been. It's part of my family trust, established by my great-grandfather and updated by my father. You never had any legal claim to it. Nina stared at the documents like they were written in a foreign language. But we're married. Community property. Oregon law recognizes separate property established before marriage and maintained separately throughout. This house and everything in it belongs to the Ford family trust. You can't mortgage it, sell it, or claim it in a divorce? The realization hit her like a physical blow. All her plans, all her schemes, all her betrayals, they'd been built on a foundation that never existed. The second mortgage you took out, I continued. It's secured against your personal guarantee, not the property itself. The bank can't foreclose on a house you don't own. Then what? They can sue you personally for the full amount. They can garnish your wages, seize your assets, destroy your credit for the next decade. But they can't take my house. Nina's world was collapsing in real time, and I watched with the detached interest of an engineer studying structural failure. She'd gambled everything on a lie and lost. Alex, please, she begged. I know I made mistakes, but we can work through this. We can go to counseling. I can get help for the gambling. Can you bring Tyler back from Mexico? The question stopped her cold. Tyler had fled the country 3 days ago, one step ahead of the fraud charges that would have landed him in prison. He'd cleaned out his remaining accounts and disappeared, leaving Nina to face the consequences of their partnership alone. He said he loved me. He said a lot of things. None of them were true. I stood up and walked to the window that looked out over the garden I'd planted, the yard where I'd hoped to watch grandchildren play someday. Everything looked the same, but the context had changed completely. I want you out of my house by Friday, I said without turning around. Where am I supposed to go? That's not my problem anymore. Alex, you can't do this. I'm your wife. I turned back to face her, and she must have seen something in my expression that made her shrink back in her chair. You stopped being my wife the moment you chose Tyler over me. You stopped being my wife when you stole our money to fund your gambling obsession. You stopped being my wife when you plotted to sell my family's house to pay for your mistakes. The divorce papers are already filed. Devin prepared them last week after I showed him the surveillance footage of you and Tyler planning my destruction in my own living room. Nina's face went completely white. You were recording us? I was protecting myself. The footage shows you discussing the sale of property you don't own, conspiracy to commit fraud, and infidelity. Your lawyer will advise you to sign whatever I put in front of you, because fighting me in court will only make things worse for you. She sat there crying, destroyed by the weight of her own choices, and I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. This was what happened when people mistook kindness for weakness, when they confused patience with stupidity. Devin knew? She asked through her tears. Devin's been in love with you for 20 years. When I showed him what you really were, it broke something inside him. He's the one who suggested I record everything, who helped me understand the legal implications of what you were doing. The betrayal hit her like another physical blow. Her oldest friend, the man she'd thought she could manipulate, had turned against her in the end. I loved you, she whispered. No, I said. You loved what I could give you. The house, the security, the respectability. When you needed more than that, you went looking elsewhere instead of talking to me. I walked back to the table and gathered up the legal documents, leaving only the foreclosure notice in front of her. You have until Friday to pack your things. Take only what belongs to you personally. Clothes, jewelry that wasn't pawned, personal items. Everything else stays. Alex, this conversation is over, Nina. Your marriage is over. Your life as you knew it is over. What happens next depends on how gracefully you can accept that. Nina left on Thursday, one day earlier than I'd demanded. I watched from my workshop window as she loaded her car with suitcases and boxes, moving like a ghost through the house that had never really been hers. She didn't try to take anything that wasn't clearly personal property. The legal documentation I'd shown her had made the consequences of theft very clear. Devin called that afternoon. She's gone? He asked. Yes. How do you feel? I considered the question while looking around my workshop, surrounded by the tools and projects that had always been my real companions. Empty, but not in a bad way. Like when you tear down a rotted structure, there's relief in having it gone. Alex, I'm sorry. About everything. About not seeing what she was doing. About my feelings for her. About... Devin. I cut him off gently. We've been friends for 20 years. That means something, even if it's complicated now. But I need time. I understand. Maybe in a few months we can have coffee. Talk about something other than Nina and legal problems. I'd like that. After I hung up, I walked through the house that was finally mine again. Every room held memories, some good and some poisoned by recent events. But the structure itself was sound. The foundation was solid. The bones were strong. I could build something new here. Winter came to Millbrook with unusual ferocity, bringing snow that lasted through February and winds that tested every joint and seam in older buildings. I spent the season working on restoration projects, losing myself in the familiar rhythms of repair and renewal. News of Nina's fate reached me through the small-town gossip network that connected everyone whether they wanted it or not. The bank had sued her for the full amount of the fraudulent loan, plus penalties and interest. Her wages from the part-time job she'd found at a local retail store were being garnished. She was living in a studio apartment across town, driving a 10-year-old Honda, shopping with coupons. Tyler never returned from Mexico. The fraud charges were still pending, but extradition was unlikely. He'd found a new life in Puerto Vallarta, probably charming new sufferers with stories about his property development expertise. Devin had closed his practice temporarily and was seeing a therapist, trying to work through 20 years of unrequited obsession disguised as friendship. He'd sent me a letter apologizing for his role in enabling Nina's betrayal, but I hadn't responded yet. Some wounds needed time to heal before they could be examined. In March, I received an unexpected visitor. I was replacing window frames in the Morrison house when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the voice was familiar. Alex? It's Sarah Chen. Sarah had been one of Nina's closest friends, part of the social circle that had gradually excluded me over the years. I hadn't spoken to her since the divorce was finalized. Sarah, what can I do for you? I was wondering, could we meet for coffee? There are some things I think you should know about Nina, about what really happened. We met at Miller's Diner, the same place where Devin had tried to warn me about Nina's plans months earlier. Sarah looked uncomfortable, fidgeting with her purse and avoiding eye contact. I should have told you sooner, she began. About the gambling, about Tyler, about all of it. We all knew, but Nina made us promise not to say anything. Why are you telling me now? Because I found out what she did to Jennifer Morrison. Jennifer Morrison was a widow in her 70s, one of my regular clients. I'd been restoring her Victorian house for the past 2 years, work that had been funded by her late husband's life insurance policy. What about Jennifer? Nina convinced her to invest in Tyler's development project. Told her it was a sure thing, guaranteed returns, perfect for someone on a fixed income. Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. Jennifer lost everything, $40,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. $40,000 was probably Jennifer's entire nest egg, money she'd need for medical care, housing, basic survival in her final years. Nina knew Jennifer trusted you, Sarah continued. She used your reputation, your relationship with Jennifer, to make the investment seem safe. I sat in silence, processing the information. Nina hadn't just betrayed me. She'd used my name and reputation to defraud an elderly woman who'd trusted us both. Where's Jennifer now? Her daughter moved her to assisted living in Portland. She had to sell the house to cover the losses. The house I'd been lovingly restoring, the project that had been bringing beauty back into an old woman's life, was gone, sold to pay for Nina's cascading failures. Sarah, thank you for telling me. I know it wasn't easy. Alex, we all thought Nina was just going through a rough patch. We didn't realize how bad things had gotten, how many people she was hurting. After Sarah left, I sat in the diner for another hour, staring at my coffee and thinking about consequences. Nina was facing financial ruin, social exile, and the gradual collapse of everything she'd built her identity on. I'd thought that was enough. I'd been wrong. I drove to Portland that weekend to visit Jennifer Morrison in her assisted living facility. The woman who answered the door was a shadow of the vibrant person I'd known, aged years in the space of months by stress and betrayal. Alex, she said, her face lighting up with genuine pleasure. How wonderful to see you. Her small apartment was clean but sterile, lacking the character and warmth of the house she'd lost. We talked for an hour about neutral subjects, the weather, local news, mutual acquaintances, before I finally broached the real reason for my visit. Jennifer, I want to apologize. What Nina did, using my name to convince you to invest with Tyler. I had no idea she was doing that. Jennifer's face crumpled slightly. Oh, Alex, I know you weren't involved. Nina made it very clear that the investment was her idea, her connection. But she said you'd told her Tyler was a solid businessman, someone she could trust. Another lie, built on stolen credibility. Nina had used my reputation like a credit card, spending trust I'd built over decades to fund her desperate schemes. I want to make this right, I said. The money you lost, Alex, no. Jennifer's voice was firm despite her frail appearance. That money is gone, and it was my choice to invest it. I was foolish to trust Nina, but that's not your responsibility. It is my responsibility. She was my wife. Her actions reflected on me, damaged relationships I cared about. And how is destroying yourself financially going to help anyone? I'd been asking myself the same question during the 3-hour drive to Portland. Jennifer was right. Giving her $40,000 wouldn't undo the damage Nina had caused, and it would drain most of my savings. But there was another way. What if I told you I could get your money back? Jennifer's eyes sharpened. What do you mean? Nina's personal assets are being liquidated to pay her debts. The court-appointed trustee is recovering what they can from her fraudulent investments. Your loss is documented, which means you're entitled to compensation from her estate. The lawyer said that could take years, and there might not be anything left after the bank gets paid. The lawyer doesn't know about Nina's inheritance trust. I'd spent weeks researching the legal structure of Nina's father's estate, looking for ways to protect Jennifer and Tyler's other sufferers. What I'd found was a secondary trust that Nina hadn't known about, money set aside for charitable purposes that could be redirected to pay restitution for her crimes. There's enough to make you whole, I told Jennifer. It will take some time to work through the legal process, but I can make sure you get your money back. Jennifer stared at me for a long moment, then reached over and patted my hand. You're a good man, Alex Ford. Better than any of us deserved. Spring arrived in Millbrook with the kind of explosive green growth that made the Pacific Northwest famous. I spent April working on new projects, taking on more restoration work than I'd handled in years. The phone rang constantly with referrals from satisfied clients, people who'd heard about my attention to detail and commitment to quality. The legal process to recover Jennifer's money moved slower than I'd hoped, but it was moving. Nina's assets were being systematically liquidated, and the hidden trust fund I'd discovered was providing restitution for Tyler's sufferers. Jennifer would get her $40,000 back, plus interest. Other sufferers were coming forward as word spread about the recovery fund. Tyler and Nina had left a trail of financial destruction across 3 states, Small investors who'd trusted the wrong people with their life savings. The fund would help most of them, though nothing could restore the time and peace of mind they'd lost. Nina called me in May. "Alex, I need to ask you something." Her voice was different, smaller, worn down by months of consequences. I hadn't spoken to her since she'd moved out of the house. "What is it?" "The lawyers are saying you found some kind of trust fund, money to pay back the people Tyler cheated. Is that true?" "Yes." "How did you—" I didn't even know that money existed. Your father was a careful man. He set up multiple trusts to protect his assets and provide for charitable giving. The lawyers who handled his estate didn't tell you about all of them." There was a long pause. "Alex, I'm grateful for what you're doing, for Jennifer and the others. But I have to ask, is there anything left for me?" The question hung between us like a bridge I could choose to cross or burn. "Your legal debts total about $300,000, I said. "The trust fund contains approximately $400,000. After restitution to Tyler's sufferers and legal fees, there might be $20,000 or $30,000 left. That's not enough to start over. It's more than most people get after destroying their lives with gambling and fraud." Another pause. "You could have kept the trust fund money for yourself. Why didn't you?" I considered the question while looking out my workshop window at the garden I'd replanted after Nina left. New growth required clearing away what was dead or diseased first. "Because keeping it would have made me like you," I said finally. "And I've worked too hard to build something better than that." The papers were signed on a Thursday in June, transferring the last of the recovered funds to Tyler's sufferers and officially closing the legal proceedings against Nina. She was bankrupt but free, her debts paid, and her criminal exposure minimal thanks to cooperation with investigators. I was leaving the courthouse when I saw her sitting on a bench outside, staring at the building like it held answers to questions she was afraid to ask. She looked older than her 36 years, worn down by stress and consequences. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by discount store purchases and thrift shop finds. But there was something different in her posture, a kind of exhausted honesty that hadn't been there before. "Alex," she said when she saw me approaching. "Can we talk?" We walked to the small park across from the courthouse, finding an empty bench under an oak tree that provided shade from the afternoon sun. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. "I keep trying to understand how it got so bad," Nina said finally. "How I went from being your wife to this. Do you really want to know?" She nodded, though I could see the fear in her eyes. "It started when you decided your problems were more important than our marriage. When you chose to lie instead of asking for help. When you decided I wasn't worth trusting with the truth. I was scared," she said. "The gambling started as just entertainment, something fun to do with the girls in Vegas. But then it became, I don't know how to explain it, like I needed it. You needed the excitement, the risk, the feeling of being someone different than who you were." "Yes. And when I started losing, I told myself I could win it back. Just one more bet, one more hand, one more spin. Before I knew it, I'd lost everything and I was in debt to people who don't accept excuses." "So you stole from our marriage to pay for your obsession. I borrowed from our future to fix a temporary problem." She laughed bitterly. "God, listen to me. I'm still making excuses." "What about Tyler?" Nina was quiet for a long time, watching children play on the swings across the park. "Tyler made me feel exciting again, desirable, like I was worth taking risks for. When you looked at me, I saw disappointment and worry. When Tyler looked at me, I saw adventure and possibility. You saw what you wanted to see. Tyler saw an opportunity to make money by exploiting your desperation. I know that now. But at the time, it felt like love. Love doesn't ask you to betray the people who actually care about you." We sat in silence again, watching the normal world go about its business around us. Families playing, couples walking, people living uncomplicated lives that didn't require lawyers and liquidation proceedings. "What happens now?" Nina asked. "Now you figure out how to build a life worth living. You get help for the gambling obsession. You find work that doesn't depend on other people's trust. You learn to live with the consequences of your choices." "And us?" I looked at her then, really looked, and tried to find some remnant of the woman I'd fallen in love with 23 years earlier. She was still there, buried under layers of poor decisions and broken promises, but she was changed beyond recognition. There is no us, Nina. There hasn't been for a long time. She nodded, tears running down her face. I loved you, you know. In my own screwed-up way, I really did love you. I know, but love isn't enough when it's not backed up by honesty and commitment and basic respect for the other person. Could you ever forgive me? The question I'd been asking myself for months. Could I forgive the woman who'd stolen from me, lied to me, planned to destroy everything I'd built? Could I let go of the anger that had sustained me through the long process of defending myself? I already have, I said, surprising myself with the truth of it. Not because you deserve it, but because carrying that anger was poisoning everything I was trying to rebuild. Nina stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. But you destroyed my life. Everything I had, everything I was. It's all gone. You destroyed your own life. I just refused to let you destroy mine too. She sat there crying while I stood up and prepared to walk away from her forever. Alex, she called after me, what if I'd been honest from the beginning? What if I'd told you about the gambling, asked for help instead of lying? I stopped and turned back to face her one last time. Then we'd be having this conversation in our kitchen instead of on a park bench. We'd be talking about treatment options and financial planning instead of bankruptcy and divorce. We'd still be married. But we're not. No, I said. We're not. I walked away then, leaving Nina on the bench with her tears and her regrets and the wreckage of the life she'd chosen to build on lies. I didn't look back. 6 months later, I was finishing work on a custom dining set when Devin knocked on my workshop door. It was the first time I'd seen him since the divorce was finalized, and he looked different, healthier somehow, more grounded. Coffee? He asked, holding up a thermos and 2 cups. We sat on my back porch, drinking coffee and watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. The silence between us was comfortable in a way it hadn't been for years. I heard Jennifer got her money back, Devin said finally. Last week. She's thinking about buying a small house, something she can manage on her own. That's good. What you did for her, for all of Tyler's sufferers? It was the right thing. It was the only thing. Devin nodded, understanding more than he was saying. Have you heard from Nina? No, and I don't expect to. She's working at a diner in Salem, living in a trailer park from what I heard. Seems to be staying clean, no more gambling. Good for her. We sat in silence again, 2 old friends trying to find their way back to something that had been damaged but maybe not destroyed. I've been thinking about what you said, Devin told me. About being in love with someone who would never love me back. You were right. Love makes people do stupid things sometimes. 20 years of stupid things. He laughed, but there was pain in it. I convinced myself I was being noble, being patient, waiting for her to realize what we could have together. Really, I was just being pathetic. We see what we want to see, especially when it comes to the people we care about. What about you? Any thoughts about dating again? I considered the question while watching a hawk circle overhead, hunting in the growing darkness. Maybe someday. When I meet someone who understands the difference between building something together and just taking what they want. You'll find her. Maybe. Or maybe I'll just focus on building things that last. Houses, furniture, friendships worth keeping. Devin smiled at that. The first genuine smile I'd seen from him in years. I'd like to be one of those friendships if you'll have me. We've got 20 years of history, Devin. That counts for something, even if it's complicated. Thank you. As the sun disappeared behind the mountains, I thought about the house behind us, the workshop full of tools and half-finished projects, the life I'd rebuilt from the wreckage of betrayal. It wasn't the life I'd planned 23 years ago when I'd carried Nina across the threshold, but it was mine, built on solid foundations, honest work, and relationships based on truth instead of convenience. Nina had been right about one thing. I wasn't the same man she'd married. The passive carpenter who'd trusted without question was gone, replaced by someone who understood the difference between kindness and weakness, between patience and stupidity. I'd learned to build traps as well as furniture, to tear down what was rotten instead of trying to repair what couldn't be saved. The skills that had made me good at restoration had also made me effective at destruction when destruction was necessary. But mostly, I'd learned that some things were worth fighting for, and some people would never stop taking until you made them stop. The house stood solid behind us in the darkness, weathered but strong, built to last for generations. Like everything worth having, it had required careful planning, quality materials, and the patience to do things right the first time. I was finally ready to start building again. The end.